Welcome to this explainer, okay? We are going to jump right in today. For a really long time, the popular narrative surrounding pre-Columbian Native American societies has been, well, to put it mildly, overly simplistic. We constantly hear stories that paint these incredibly rich, diverse cultures with just a single broad brush. But today, we're going to completely shatter those myths by looking closely at the archaeological evidence, historical records, and these deeply enduring traditions. We are going to uncover the breathtaking complexity, the sheer engineering genius, and the profound social equity that defined the Americas long before European contact. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Rethinking Native American societies. 2. Ingenious agriculture and environment. 3. Gender, power, and equity. 4. Diverse forms of government. 5. The mighty Aztec Empire. And finally 6. The Great League of Peace.
All right, Section 1, Rethinking Native American Societies. So, does complex engineering always require farming? I really want to start by challenging a preconceived notion that a lot of us have about what actually makes a civilization complex. Your traditional history textbook is usually going to tell you, yes, that you absolutely need highly productive farming to support the organized labor required for advanced architecture. But let's take a look at Poverty Point in what is now Louisiana. Ancestors living there 1,000 years ago built this expansive, incredibly complex earthen amphitheater. And this is basically a massive crack in that traditional narrative. Why? Because its construction required highly sophisticated mathematics and intensely organized, skilled labor. Yet, the archaeological evidence suggests they didn't even practice agriculture. They completely blow up the binary idea that you're either a complex, hierarchical farming civilization or a simple hunter-gatherer society. They were something entirely different and incredibly advanced.
Moving on to Section 2, Ingenious Agriculture and Environment. Now, while some of these advanced societies didn't farm, the indigenous groups who did farm utilized incredibly brilliant, sustainable methods. Let's look at a foundational agricultural concept you might have heard of, the Three Sisters. This is a highly sustainable, interdependent planting method using corn, beans, and squash. All across the eastern woodland areas, stretching right from the Great Lakes down to the Atlantic coast, communities actively managed their environment. They used controlled fire management to clear out underbrush, which created these vast, park-like hunting grounds, and, crucially, prepared the nutrient-rich ash soil to plant these vital crops. And the biological synergy of these three plants is just remarkable. When they're planted together in small, raised hills, they form a perfect little ecosystem. The corn stalks grow tall, right, and they provide this essential vertical support for the bean vines to climb. In return, the bean plants actually pull nitrogen directly from the air and deposit it into the soil, acting as a natural fertilizer for the corn. Meanwhile, those broad squash leaves spread out all across the ground, gathering water, providing shade to keep the soil nice and moist, and even preventing weeds from growing. So the key takeaway here is that this method, combined with specialized hand tools, produced massive, high-energy food yields without overburdening or stripping the soil of its nutrients, and that was a very stark contrast to European monoculture farming. Section 3, Gender, Power, and Equity. You know, the way these societies fed themselves wasn't just about clever agriculture. It was actually tied directly to highly equitable social structures. When we contrast traditional European patriarchal structures with indigenous matrilineal structures, like those of the Gitxsan and Cherokee peoples, a pretty stark difference emerges. In a lot of Native communities, ancestry was traced exclusively through mothers. Biological fathers would often join the mother's extended family, and sometimes it was actually the mother's brothers, the uncles, who took on the most direct roles in raising the children. Because of this dynamic, mothers wielded enormous influence at the local level. They had direct authority over the agriculture, women frequently chose their own husbands, and honestly, divorce was a relatively straightforward process. A man's identity and influence often depended directly on his relationships to the women in his life. Anthropologist Eleanor Leacock really hit the nail on the head here. She noted, "Nothing in the structure of egalitarian band societies necessitated special deference to men. There were no economic and social liabilities that bound women to be more sensitive to men's needs and feelings than vice versa. This was a true, genuine partnership. Work roles were highly flexible. For instance, the Oglala Lakota leader Luther Standing Bear actually recalled that if a man was home from hunting, he happily busied himself lightening the workload of the women. They cared for one another and just worked together for the ultimate good of the family." We can see this partnership so clearly in the traditional roles of Navajo women, weaving and preparing food. But it goes way deeper than just domestic chores. Women were engaging in permanent, intensive agriculture, using hand tools like adzes and diggers.
And furthermore, when men engaged in big game hunting, which was this highly social, community-wide ritualistic event, the women took part by cleaning and curing the hides. And here's the kicker. Once cured, those hides became the women's personal property. So this demonstrates a true, undeniable economic partnership. Section 4, diverse forms of government. Let's see how all of this builds into their political structures. Native governments were just as complex and varied as their European counterparts across the ocean, though they were often far more democratic. There was no single Native American way to govern. Coastal foraging societies in the Pacific Northwest actually mirrored feudal Europe. They operated as courtly societies with ruling nobles, commoner labor, and very strict hereditary ranking systems. Meanwhile, the Muskogees and Seminoles utilized a really sophisticated three-branch government led by elite clans who handled the military, civil administration, and sacred rituals separately. But over in the eastern woodlands, governance was heavily based on democratic consensus. Chiefs were chosen for their wisdom, not their bloodline. And they definitely didn't rule like kings. Decisions required group consensus, and remarkably, if they couldn't reach an agreement, dissenters were entirely free to just pack up, leave, and form their own new communities nearby. Consider this number for a second. 90%. That represents the amount of collected wealth that Powhatan, a highly powerful indigenous ruler in what is now Virginia, actually redistributed back to his people, paying special attention to the neediest among them. It really highlights a core indigenous philosophy. Land was a shared resource to be used, not a commodity to be owned or sold off. And leaders weren't judged by how much wealth they could hoard in a castle, but by their extreme generosity. Their primary job was literally to ensure that severe starvation was avoided for everyone. Of course, knowledge and governance require proper preservation, which brings us to this Ojibwe birchbark scroll from 1797. Across the entire Americas, highly complex communication systems thrived. Eastern woodland peoples wove plant fibers, plains artisans painted buffalo skins, and Mesoamericans carved stone and painted textiles. Down in central Peru, between 600 and 1000 CE, they even developed quipu technology, which is a knotted string device constructed in an ancient binary code that actually remains unbroken to this very day. Literally ancient data storage. This intricate Delaware bandolier bag from 1870 reminds us of the Lenape people. They had hundreds of independent, dispersed settlements scattered all throughout the Hudson and Delaware River watersheds. But they weren't bound together by some iron-fisted ruler or military force. Instead, they were completely unified by their shared art, oral histories, consensus-based politics, and a shared matrilineal clan system, where the women selected the leaders, who were known as sachems. All right, Section 5, the mighty Aztec Empire. Now we are pivoting sharply south to Mesoamerica, where we see an entirely different scale of political and physical organization. The Mexica people migrated into the Valley of Mexico and founded their legendary city-state, Tenochtitlan, on a lake island back in 1325. By 1427, they had formed the Triple Alliance with Texcoco and Tlacopan, laying the absolute foundation for the Aztec Empire. And they ruled through a vast, decentralized network, demanding heavy, regular tribute from the subject peoples they conquered. They collected everything from immense stores of corn to highly valued luxury goods like jade, cacao, and gold, projecting their massive military and economic dominance as far south as modern-day Honduras. But honestly, it's their engineering genius that is just absolutely stunning. Right at the center of Tenochtitlan stood the massive temple Mayor Pyramid. During times of severe drought and famine, the ruler of Texcoco, Nezahualcóyotl, designed and built a massive aqueduct and irrigation system to save the allied cities. But even more incredible than that were the Chinampas. These were massive artificial farming islands created by dredging nutrient-rich mud right from the lake bottom and piling it up. They essentially engineer brand new land out of water just to feed their incredibly dense, massive population. It's brilliant. And finally, Section 6, the Great League of Peace. For our final case study, let's head back up north to look at one of the most enduring and influential political systems in human history, developed by the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois Confederacy. Centuries ago, amidst awful drought and vicious warfare in the Northeast, a visionary known as the Peacemaker traveled the land trying to end the bloodshed. It is a fascinating story. First, he gained the vital support of a woman named Jigunhase, who fed him and pledged her help, along with a spokesperson named Hiawatha. Together, they remarkably managed to convince a tyrannical leader named Tadadaho to join their cause. The Peacemaker literally uprooted a white pine tree and had the warring nations bury their weapons right beneath its roots. He united 5 nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, into the Great League of Peace. And this league was overseen by a central council of 50 sachems, who were crucially chosen by the traditional clan mothers. That incredible unity is visually enshrined right here in the Hiawatha Belt. Made of traditional shell wampum, each shape represents one of those original 5 nations, all connected by a central line representing the path of peace. But what is truly profound about the system is its modern legacy. Decades later, when the founders of the United States were trying to build their own nation, they looked directly at this Haudenosaunee League and its brilliant federal system of united yet independent states for inspiration.
So, all of this brings us to one final major question. If pre-Columbian societies across the Americas were this deeply complex, capable of monumental engineering without farming, maintaining high-yield sustainable agriculture, operating with profound gender equity, and inventing federal democratic systems that outlasted global empires, how does that completely reshape the way we view the very foundations of modern democracy? Recognizing the sheer sophistication of indigenous cultures doesn't just change our view of the past, it fundamentally alters our understanding of human societal potential. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning those myths.